Today, I am honored to have Tami Goetz, no relation, here with us to talk about her role in helping STEM in her state from a government perspective. And then hopefully that'll give you guys some great information that you can take back to your state. We'll talk about some of the challenges. So, Tami, tell us about yourself.
Well, thanks, Carrie. I appreciate it. And I'm honored to share the microphone with someone with the same last name as I have. So my name is Tami Goetz, and I am the director for the Utah STEM Action Center, our science, tech, engineering, and math initiative for the state. I started to get into this work as state science advisor when I was appointed by John Huntsman Jr., the governor at that time, and developed a passion for bringing STEM to all kids, teachers, community members, to homes. STEM has become it's an acronym, but it's more than that. Obviously, it's a passion. It's something that's embedded in our lives and everyday activities that we do, from everything from the technology and gadgets in our home to the cosmetics we use to the medical advice we seek and treatments and cars, communication, energy, you name it. It's all STEM. And so I got involved in this, like I said, as state science advisor, and we realized, much like a lot of other states at the time, that we were doing a lot of great stuff in STEM education, but we were kind of in silos, and we weren't connecting and collaborating and creating kind of this mutual reinforcing environment or culture in the state around STEM education. And so that's what led us to say, well, why don't we bring the stakeholders to the table, find out what their needs are, see where we can actually play a role in filling those gaps and addressing those gaps to bring, more equitable access and inclusion to STEM for all kids in Utah. And so, that's where we said, okay, let's bring together some industry partners. We had a couple key legislators that worked with us, industry leaders, higher ed and public ed, I should say, and a couple of state agencies. And we said, how do we do this well? And the good news is that we weren't the first to start a STEM education initiative at a state level in the country. And I say that intentionally because it is good news. It allows you to look and see what others have done, what mistakes they've made, where they've stumbled, so that you don't fall into the same rabbit holes, right? So that's where we explored probably about, a dozen to 15 different state STEM initiatives and picked the best elements, the things that worked, that they did, and went to the state legislature with a bill with the help of Representative Al Peterson, who was the chief sponsor at the time from the House, created STEM Action Center. So that was a pivotal moment back in 2013, I think, because it was the first time at the level of the state that we had said for STEM education that we needed to collaborate, leverage resources, and work across all partners that were involved in STEM education, not just K-12, not just higher ed, but industry that needs talent and needs to be able to fill their existing positions and prepare for the future as we grow, which we know STEM jobs are growing like crazy. They have been for several years, for many years. And so when we brought together community and cultural partners, we do STEM outside of the classroom in these informal, out-of-school environments. So we needed to bring in our museums and our community groups, such as Boys and Girls Clubs and 4-H and Junior Achievement. And as a collective, kind of say, what can we do well together? How can we do some shared metrics and track some outcomes together? So lo and behold, came on as a director after we stood this up with legislative funds and statute. And we've been in business since 2013. The STEM Action Center, we just went through a new strategic plan process the last year and feel very good about the emphasis we're going to play on early STEM learning, community-based STEM resources, really holding our feet to the fire, holding our own selves accountable to doing a much better job, looking for promising and best practices to make STEM more equitable, more inclusive, and really help to broaden participation with students that typically don't see themselves in STEM. And so we're working hard to up our game in that kind of equity space as well. So that's, being the director, I have a great team of educators, data and evaluation folks. We've got people that have worked in summer programs and out-of-school programming for STEM. So we have a pretty deep and broad level of experience within the STEM Action Center. But I would say, Carrie, the best part about it is that at the STEM Action Center, the secret sauce is in the partnerships. By ourselves, we can make a very, very small dent in the challenges that we face to bring STEM education into classrooms and out of classrooms. But together and working with all of our amazing partners across all of the higher ed and public ed and community and other state agencies and industry, I think for the last, 7-8 years, there's been a lot of progress in this area.
You bring up a lot of points, so we're going to dissect this a little bit.
A little unpacking.
Right? Yeah, do a little unpacking here. But going from 2013 to now, obviously the whole STEM field has changed. Not so much the jobs, but I think there's a renewed interest in trades as part of this. There's a renewed interest in skills-based learning. So you bring up really great points with the boys and girls clubs and bringing in some of those organizations like Girls Who Code and things like that, because, a college degree is great, but it's not in everybody's future. And so, if you can get one, that's an awesome thing, but I don't think that you should not be able to work because you don't have a college degree for whatever reason, or maybe you work first and your company helps you get that college degree. Life is different for every person. And I think we lose sight of that a lot because there's this big push on STEM. Everybody's got to have a 4-year degree, and we lose tracks with veterans that are coming back. We lose, a lot of people that really should have a seat at that table. And so from a statewide perspective, especially bringing in some of those organizations, how new is that in your process? And how did you get them to actually come sit down at the table? Because I think, in a lot of cases, from a lot of the people that I talk to, the hard part is getting mind share with people and getting people to sit down at the table and getting industry to hire those people and look at those people.
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think a lot of it is just how you, first you have to be very solid. I think you have to be solid in how you define STEM, right? We just went through we have a STEM advocacy group where it's a handful of us from the STEM Action Center and a couple of our great partners over at the State Board of Ed. And we said, the first thing when working together, we all have to make sure that we look at STEM through the same lens, with the same, definitions. And so our definition includes, kind of at the most fundamental level, Carrie, not just math and science as foundational, areas of discipline, areas of study, areas of interest, but also those areas that you typically find in career and technical education. So your skilled trades, and what we call CTE, career and technical ed. And that is the T and the E in STEM. And what you cannot just do science and math by itself and address all the needs for every child, every student, every adult learner, every company's talent. You have to address the technology and engineering and STEM, because if you can't apply the math and you can't apply the science to solve the problems that are addressed, we need to solve in our companies, then we're not going to get very far in this endeavor of ours. And so we include areas and trades such as, automotive, even welding, construction, advanced materials and manufacturing. People often forget in career and tech ed, you also have your kind of health sciences, your technicians, your radiology technician, your medical technician, your nursing. And then there's engineering and engineering technology and computer science and information sciences. These are all integral parts of the STEM conversation. And I think first and foremost, you need to recognize that STEM comes in a lot of different packages with a lot of different looks to it, right? And so I know a lot of people say, oh, well, don't get out of, that kind of, tradition.
Stay in your lane, Ralph. Stay in your lane.
Yeah. And let's stay pure. Let's keep the purity of STEM. But I'm like, why? For a lot of our kids, if you just start talking science and math and engineering and technology, they're going to glaze. Yeah. Or it's going to go over their head, or they're going to lock up in fear. There's so many wonderful entry points for all kids where they can learn that they are doing STEM without even realizing it. And so I think in answer to, like, how do you approach this? You approach it with the idea that we can't afford to not provide as many entry points, open doors, opportunities in STEM as possible, because we need the talent in STEM. It's just that simple. And so students need to see opportunities to come in through career and tech ed and get into a certification program and maybe then jump to a 2-year community college degree or technology, go to one of the tech colleges and get a 1-year certification. And then if they want to go on for a 4-year degree, the door's open. They can do it if they should choose, but they don't have to if it's not in their game plan, right? You just need to make sure that they know which doors are open. They know that they don't have to go for the 4-year degree because there are a lot of really amazing, well-paying jobs in STEM with a trades certification or a 2-year degree. And those are valid credentials in the STEM world, totally valid.
Absolutely. There's all these apprenticeship programs out there, and these guys are getting, and gals are getting out of these apprenticeship programs. Some of them are pulling in 6 figures a year and they have zero college debt. They're doing something they absolutely love. And I think we really have done a disservice in this country where we sort of took the trades back like they were, you go to trade school if you're not good enough for college, and which is really horrible because if it weren't for the trades, none of us would have a job. Nothing would get built. We wouldn't have a place to live. And there's skilled trades and there's a lot of artistry that goes into all of these. Even if you go into a data center and look how they do the plumbing, I mean, it's a work of art.
The HVAC, and all the stuff on that.
Oh, yeah. And I think that we really have to give props where props are due for the people that do that. And a lot of kids drop out of school because they hate math. And then, you put STEM in there and you focus on math, and that terrifies them. And they think, oh, well, then there's no place in this world for me. Or even in tech, there's this kind of misnomer that you have to write code to be in tech. And there's a million jobs in tech that you never write a line of code ever. So I think it's really great that you've just so rounded this out, which I think is probably a really good lesson for other people that are looking to do something similar in their state, is that you have to have that well-rounded approach.
You really do. And you have to, and that's where the partnerships come in place, right? I mean, our partners, Department of Workforce Services and the technical colleges, Salt Lake Community College, they're amazing. And they keep us grounded. They remind us that apprenticeships are a fantastic internship on steroids approach. I tell you what, Carrie, I got into welding about 3 years ago. I would not have any problem going into welding as a career right now, just because it's I don't know. Until you start exploring this and kids get the opportunity to explore, they don't know what scratches their brain, what gets their passion going. And with that in mind, I think parents need to, I wish we had more opportunities to take parents to places in like aerospace and defense, like Boeing and Northrop Grumman, to see that manufacturing is not it's not what they think it is. It's clean tech. Those manufacturers in aerospace and defense and in medical device manufacturing, they're clean, they're high tech, they're skilled, they pay well. And the real beauty of it is that I think they show students that there are these stacked kind of these pathways that they can, I use the word pathways a little bit with a cringe because we overuse it, I think. But I do think that there are these sequential steps they can take, these springboards. And I love the fact that we allow someone to come in and start with an early soft entry in like a certification or a 2-year degree. They get in, they work, they get some experience, they find out what really gets the passion going. And then they can say, hey, I just noticed somebody else over here at, this company has got a bachelor's degree and they've gone up the ladder a little further than I have. And I'm going to talk to them. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, they're looking into possibly getting another 2 years and getting their next credential. And so it doesn't close any doors on these students. It's what I really like. They get that lifelong learning in a real sense and those opportunities. So, because like you said, if they only see 4 years as the option, many of these students won't do it. They just won't.
Sure.
They can't.
Absolutely.
They can't see themselves there. And so, why let that be a barrier? Let's just open a few other doors for them to explore and give them a whole menu of options to pick from.
I think that exposure is a big part of the problem too. Like a lot of younger kids, we have this conversation a lot in tech specifically about how we really have to reach kids at a much, much younger age. We have to make these careers visible. In the data center industry, it's particularly hard because to be fair, it's kind of a fledgling industry. And most people that are in the data center industry don't have a degree in data centers because they just started having those within the last couple years anyway. And so they fell in through some other path. But again, it's that exposure. It's somebody that got started and then got a job there and then kind of grew their skills. And I think that we don't do enough skills-based hiring for sure. And I think that really we have to challenge HR to be, if we're gonna bridge the digital divide, if we're gonna have better diversity and inclusion, and we're gonna break some glass ceilings, we have to realize that the degree is not everything. Like there's a hashtag that follows this podcast: hire the person, not the paper. To me, I would rather have somebody with 4 years experience than a 4-year degree in something completely unrelated that I'm going to have to turn around and train and go get certified anyway, because those 4 years experience to me are really worth a lot. And if somebody had to really kind of go the scrappy route to figure that out, and, that's different, but that's a diversity of thought to somebody that's got a 4-year degree. Because if everybody learns how to do things the same way, then everybody's only going to do it the same way. And you completely lose the whole diversity premise.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think back, a friend of mine, he works with one of the engineering companies here in town. And he used to say that they wouldn't hire anyone for any of their engineering positions unless they had dirty fingernails. He said, we wanted people we knew got dirty, knew how to build things, And so he said, we always so some of our best engineers were the ones that we hired that had dirty fingernails, that were out in the garage fixing things and building. And there's something to that, right? And I think that, the best case scenario, at least like if I look at my own kids, I think I would love to see them pursue, an academic pathway and then jump out into work for a while and use, their kind of fledgling toolbox to get some work experience. Take a little time to learn those work skills and really figure out what it is they like, and then kind of do like that figure 9 back in and continue and really be able to dial in on what it is that they're good at, what they enjoy, and kind of what they're willing to put up with on the parts that they don't enjoy, right? Because let's face it, every part of our job is like earth shattering. And even though I probably have one of the best jobs in the world, there's still mundane drudgery, of contracts. And I think part of these, getting that work experience, like say through an apprenticeship or a 2-year degree as a springboard and getting out into the workforce before you complete a 4-year degree, if you choose to.
It's not that many years ago, as the crow flies, so they say, that country doctors learned to be doctors by shadowing another country doctor. Nobody went to college. There was no big books involved other than the ones that sort of had diagnostics in it. But I think, it's part of that exposure thing, right? If you want to take care of people, there's a lot of jobs where you can take care of people. You don't have to be a one thing or another. There's a million things, like you said, all the technologists, all of those things. And people should be respected if they choose not to go to college, and they deserve to make a damn good living. So, I think that all of what you guys are doing is really cool because you've brought in all of those organizations and all of those other factions. So tell me, as you looked at some of the other states that did things well and some of the other states that maybe you learned what not to do lessons from, what were some of the glaring examples of things that you just said right off the bat, we have to do this, we have to do this? And maybe at the opposite, we'll never do this, we'll never do this.
Oh, how far is this broadcast into whom?
We don't have to mention names now. The names can be changed to protect the innocent.
It's interesting. Some of the things that I think that we did, and I really appreciate it, wasn't easy. I'm not going to lie. Receiving state funding is we received a considerable amount of state funding in the beginning, and it's kind of one of those careful what you ask for, right? There's a lot of accountability, as it should be. It's taxpayers' dollars. If you're going to be spending millions of dollars of taxpayers' funds, you darn well better be willing to be accountable. And we were. And I think being able to be supported by key legislators that were passionate about STEM, such that they were willing to secure ongoing state funding, was, I think, really important. Because as one of the legislators who's been a big supporter of ours said, you've been given the gift of being 100% sustainable from day one. Go do a good job. get your job done now because you don't have to worry about finding money to pay your people. And so that was, it was nice to have an ongoing budget for our operations from day one so that then we could really focus on being strategic about programs and partnerships. And we set up a 501c3, a public, foundation, but allowed us to really focus on implementation and assessment and evaluation and showing outcomes. So I think that's the first thing that we learned looking at some of the other STEM initiatives was that securing that sustainability from the very beginning allowed you to not be distracted by worrying about that, right? And you don't need a huge budget to do it. And so that was number one. I think, as I said, we do have a public 501c3. I think that's another really critical part of what we did. And we did it a little bit different than other STEM initiatives in other states. And some of them are, if you look at the state initiatives for STEM education across the country, a good majority of them run out of the governor's office or, out of the executive branch. And the second larger kind of group from an organizational structure are those that are their own public 501c3s. They're standalone foundations, right? And then there's maybe a couple that operate out of the State Office of Education in the states, but not very many. The majority are either in the governor's office or as a industry-supported 501c3. What we did is we operate out of the executive branch, but we also have our own public foundation that supports our industry partnerships and fundraising and, foundation grant writing and that type of thing. So we're a little different in that respect, which I think is really important. One of the things that we noticed for some of the STEM initiatives that had been going for a few years is that they didn't diversify their funding from the very start. They didn't go into their operational plan with that as an intentional design. So for instance, there were some states that went out of the gate 100% funded by a huge anchor company. And when that anchor company decided not to do STEM education or were suffering economically and couldn't pay the bills, at such a high level.
Or moved for other reasons. That happened here too.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then there were some that were 100% on state. That's a struggle too, right? And so one of the things we decided from the very start was that we wanted to be able to come out of the gate with the intent to have funding strands from multiple places. Federal.
That's good. That keeps you from being, hit with the political turnover and what happens in the political turnover and all that volatility too.
Sure. Now, with that being said, our operational funding is still state, but it's a smaller part of our state funding. And we try to keep our team lean and really work with partners to bring in the resources we need to run programs and try to look for what exists and scale, promising the best practices. So I think that was another thing, was just being smart and intentional about your funding strategy for the center. And that was a big deal. And I think, so those are kind of things you have to do. I think it's a really wise thing to do. Take every opportunity, even though it's not fun, to present to the state legislature. We had to present to, I don't know how many committees in the first 3 to 4 years, every year. It's scary. It's not fun. But I tell you what, every chance you get to share what you're doing, you need to jump on it. And so we did that with our state legislators. It was, for the most part, successful. And there are always going to be people that you have to constantly be, kind of working with and helping, them see what you do and how it's important. But that's the case with any organization, I think.
Sure. And then what about things not to do?
I think you need to not let industry. For instance, we came out of the gate very strong with an industry coalition. In fact, the funding we received in the first 2 years of the STEM Action Center really, we have to give credit to our industry partners. And at that time, the Utah Technology Council, UTC, Rich Nelson's group, industry really carried the bulk of the work to get us our funding. But what ends up happening, you have to be very careful about, and I will be very candid. You get your head so buried in what I call the implementation and evaluation trench that you forget to keep the communication strong with your industry partners and keep them engaged in a meaningful way as you're trying to also get programs off the ground. and show outcomes. And we let our industry partnerships, at least our coalition as a regular kind of convening, we let that languish a bit. And we shouldn't have, because like for instance, when we were trying to get funding, almost 5-6 years ago for computer science, because we saw the need for it. Schools were telling us we need more computer science resources. It was hard to get the funding because we just didn't have the industry coalition to kind of call in to help right away. So we're building that back up now, very intentionally, very strategically. And I vow to never let those partnerships languish again. I mean, don't get me wrong, we've got strong industry partnerships, but we just didn't have an intentional convening like 2 or 3 times a year to keep the larger group of industry partners informed and engaged and aware of what we were doing.
Well, that's so important because they're the ones that are going to hire who comes out of this program anyway. So you might as well make sure that they're, the skills are being taught that are going to be used.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I don't want to make it sound like we weren't working with industry partners. We just weren't doing those larger convenings, which when you already have a solid core of industry partners you work with, you forget that larger kind of organized convening is really important to being able to rally people together when we need them quickly, if that makes sense. I mean,
sure.
So that was one thing I think in hindsight, I wish I had not let drop off the radar quite as much as I did. I think part of it, another thing too, is to try to be everything to everyone too soon.
Yeah, we as women tend to do that anyway.
It's true. And then if you combine the fact, which I'm guessing you're probably a lot like I am, saying no is just not in your vocabulary.
It is not. I'm challenged with that on a daily basis.
Same here, personal and professional life. And so, trying to be everything to everyone, it dilutes your impact. And I think it burns your team out pretty fast. So we had to really kind of step back in the last couple of years and say, okay, we got to put the guardrails back on. We've got to pay attention to the lane we're driving in and make sure that what we're doing is tied to a strategic plan. And it's always so hard when you're new because it's, as one of my good friends said, what was a term he called it? Whipsawed. I'd never heard the term whipsawed before. And it's where you've got all these competing kind of demands being made on you that start circling around your head, and you're just whipping your head back and forth and not really knowing where to settle, where to focus. And because you've got so many people making demands, and you have to finally kind of take a step back and say, okay, what are our core values? Who are the partners we really need to take care of right now? And so, I think as a new organization with a lot of state funding and a lot of expectations, you fall down that chasm pretty darn quickly if you're not careful.
Sure.
And so, and you have to be willing to climb back out and start over and say, wow, that was kind of not cool.
Let me out of this tornado.
Yeah.
We're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy and Toto.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And so I think a lot of new organizations probably end up, kind of going through that. In fact, I've got some folks from Alabama out of the governor's office I've been working with because they're looking to start something very similar to us. And they were just asking, how do you decide what to do? And I said, in some ways, you kind of have to get into that tornado so that you can get back out and have a clearer vision. I said, I think, the tornado experience, as you were putting it, Carrie, is almost essential to figuring out what you shouldn't be doing. And so for instance, the State Board of Ed, they're fantastic and they do a great job in the classroom, right? That's kind of where their jam is. They're in the classroom. They help with the endorsements and licensing of teachers and setting up frameworks for courses and standards. And we've kind of intentionally said, we're not needed in that space. They're doing that well. And to step out of it, even though for reasons out of our control in the beginning, we were kind of placed firmly into the classroom STEM education scene. We've now felt like after a couple of years, we can step back, take a deep breath, and look around and say, okay, there may be places in the classroom that we can partner with our State Board of Ed friends, but there's so much more in that out-of-classroom experience that needs resources and support and attention. That's a lane we can drive in.
Yeah, I think that needs assessment is so important in anything that you do. You have to really figure out where those needs are. And certainly when you're trying to bring STEM to the masses, there's a lot of places where those masses don't sit.
Yeah, it's really true. And I mean, we did our first strategic plan for the first couple of years was really more, we didn't do a lot of stakeholder assessment. And this last one, we spent a solid, 6-7 months doing focus groups, one-on-one interviews, surveys to really see, a little bit of, searching for that pat in the back, maybe, what are we doing well? But more importantly, where are the gaps? What have we missed? What do we need to do a better job of? And pretty cool stuff that came out of it. There was some stuff we were like, oh, I thought we were doing a better job there. Dang it. That sucks. Well, let's, dust ourselves off and step up and get it done. But there's things that were really like early STEM learning. There's a big need for early STEM learning resources for parents at home even. And so that was a really big deal that we saw. And then more of a community-based approach, involve the community in the conversation when you come in to work with the community to try to figure out what STEM resources they need. Not every community is built the same, right?
Very true. Very true. And access is different in all communities too. So, I'll never forget years ago, we had a conference in Vanuatu and we were doing a charity thing to leave something behind as we left. And we asked the health ministry what they needed. And they came back and said a motorcycle. I thought, well, that's just bizarre. Well, a lot of the island doesn't have roads. And so they had patients that they were trying to get tuberculosis medicine to that couldn't come into town, that lived in the rural areas. And for them, that's the one thing the health ministry needed was a motorcycle. And had we not asked, we would have bought something that they probably had duplicates of. And sometimes it's just a matter of really sitting back and just asking the question.
What is it? What do you need? Because, we all go with preconceived notions of what we think people need. But if you don't live in those communities, you don't walk in their shoes, you don't really know. For instance, we're, launching kind of through one of our grant programs and then a pending federal grant we've got, which I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We haven't heard yet, which is often a good sign. A network of innovation or maker spaces across the state in key communities to allow, parents and kids to come together, schools to have a place for their kids to make and tinker. And so one of the things, that we heard was that every makerspace isn't the same. So for instance, for some of our makerspaces down in San Juan County, we've got, more metalworking equipment for jewelry making. And for some of the more, kind of cultural based work, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. I'm not making words very well right now, but you get the point.
Yeah.
And not every community will have the same interests. There are some communities that we surveyed on a makerspace and quilting. We want to be able to sew because that's what we do down here. This is what we love.
We used to, when I was in school, probably when you were in school too, they taught home ec. You learned to cook, you learned to balance a checkbook. You learned a lot of those just essential life skills that they just don't teach anymore.
No. And our dear friend, lover, Deb Ivy with 4-H, she has some great curriculum materials that she's developed that uses quilting to teach coding skills. There's some
that's awesome.
It's some cool STEM integration around everyday things like sewing and quilting. And so we've been scrambling to pick up every industrial grade Bernina sewing machine and serger at school districts on surplus. One of our team members is a master at finding all the surplus stuff in school districts and universities and getting it a steal. And so we've got a suite of sewing machines for some of those maker spaces that have indicated and we're like, that's great. Are you willing to learn some STEM with your quilting? And the answer always comes back, yes. So
you can definitely learn fractions while you're quilting for sure.
Absolutely. There's a lot of STEM in everything. We've got our little kid kits with the early math learning, and we do paint to learn, cook. We're doing a cook to learn. We've got move to learn, build to learn. So, there's a lot of math you can build into anything for young kids. So
yeah, there's a company that makes these things called Kiwi crates.
Oh, those are amazing, aren't they?
I've got them for all my grandkids over the years. Yeah, they're just awesome. And, they're sorted by age group. But I think those kind of things are really important just for that exposure. And it makes it fun. It makes it not a chore. If you wanted somebody to have a passion for math, you don't throw them into high school algebra. You give them some foundation to make it relatable. And I think things like that are really great.
Yeah, that's kind of what for the last year and a half, we've kind of pivoted to integrated STEM. Where do we find STEM in the most unusual places that are the most fun? So one of our big projects we're launching out on is with a partner. Another one of these partnership opportunities out of Nevada called Green Our Planet, working with them and the Bank of Nevada to secure funding to start a hydroponics program. And so we're doing hopefully we're getting a grant. We should find out here in a couple of weeks, a grant from a company partner to pilot about a dozen hydroponics programs at 8 different elementary schools in the state as just kind of a pilot to assess. And then we're working with some of our partnering state divisions to put some hydroponics programs in community-based centers like libraries to address food desert issues and bring STEM to communities. And these hydroponics programs, Carrie, are so cool. I want one in my own home. You can produce like up to 200 pounds of fresh produce with these things. And they use like 20% of the water traditional gardening does.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Nuts. So, those are fun. And the curriculum for these hydroponics programs are, from 1st through 5th grade are all tied to the math and science standards. So kids are learning math and science while they grow food in their own school. And you can tie, healthy diets and nutrition and a lot of cool stuff, and space, because that's where we learned about hydroponics, was through the space programs, right? So anyway, there's so many cool things you could do in STEM, which makes it a great place for kids to learn to have fun.
I feel like in your spare time, you should start a blog on cool STEM activities.
It was funny. I was working with a group out of Denver, the Education Commission for the States, ECS, and they had pulled together kind of a workshop for a couple of days with some folks to put together a white paper, a report on early STEM learning. And there was a woman there from a university, I can't remember which one, in Iowa, and she said something that's always stuck, and this was a couple of years ago, it just stuck with me. And she's education. She really didn't know STEM. And she got involved in a project at the university where she had to go do some observations of teachers in elementary schools that were trying to integrate STEM. And she said after a year of that, it hit her. And she said that STEM is going to be the salvation of play in elementary schools. Because with all of the attention on math and reading, she said STEM is where the kids are playing. That's what I saw. Every time they were doing STEM, they were playing. It was fun. And I thought, that's really what it's all about.
It also takes the scare out of it, right?
Mm-hmm. It really does. And there are some brains that are made for pure math and pure engineering, kind of in its most pure form. But for most of us, we don't learn that way. And so, particularly with math's a tough one. It's our big gorilla in the room to try to tackle. And we're trying to get some innovative programs going around math to take the fear out of it. So,
and I think that's what turns a lot of people off to STEM is the fact that they think that math is the path there. And there's so many paths that don't involve math. So definitely a good thing. Well, we are bumping up on time, although I feel like we could sit here and talk for hours. But if you wanted to leave everybody with a parting gift or some words of wisdom, what would you have to say?
Oh my gosh, what would I say? I think making sure that whatever your kids do, that the spirit of lifelong learning is at the heart of it all. I don't care if it's art, if it's STEM, it's just getting kids to learn to love to learn, and making sure that that learning process occurs both in a building and outside of a building.
So everybody, I want to thank Tami for her time today, and thank you all for listening. And we look forward to hosting you on another edition of our podcast series. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.